3 weeks from now, the trial of Derek Chauvin begins. Now, Chauvin is, of course, the Minneapolis police officer who killed George Floyd back in May, and he did that by kneeling on his neck for nearly 9 minutes. Now, neither he nor his 3 colleagues took any notice, did they, of the constant pleas for mercy as Floyd was slowly and painfully suffocated to death. Now, when the trial process begins on the 8th of March, every one of us, if we're watching, will surely want justice for that barbaric, cold-blooded killing of a defenceless man. Now, we know that justice is a good thing, and until Chauvin, who's currently walking the streets having paid a bail bond, until he is convicted and sentenced, we'll feel a profound sense of injustice. Now, even though we all agree that justice is a good thing, a necessary thing for a civilized society, I think we all have a slightly strange relationship with justice. Essentially, put it simplistically, we want justice for others but mercy for ourselves, yeah? We want the students holding the house party over there, or running the rave, holding the rave, we want them to get caught and fined, but we want to be cut some slack, yeah? So if we get caught seeing mates, the police don't impose a heavy fine on us. Justice for others but mercy for me. And in everyday matters, we see this inconsistency in ourselves time and time again, whether it's COVID fines, speeding fines, failing to submit an essay on time, or not having prepped for a seminar. We like justice for others, but not so much for ourselves. We're happy to see blaggers rumbled by their tutor and dock some marks, but for us, we want to get away with it. The speeding motorists to be caught, especially if they're going past our house. But every time, we want to be cut the slack. I had a sobering reminder of that with regard to dropping litter. Now, you don't know me, so you don't know that I'm a total litter fascist. When my kids were young and we would go for a walk, I would make them pick up litter as we went. So by the time we got to the village shop where we might have a treat, they're holding armfuls of litter. And their friends would see them and say, "What are you doing?" I say, "Oh, going for a walk with my dad." So, okay, that's me, total litter fascist. Now, let me take you back a couple of years. I'm with my wife. We're at an exhibition at the Tate Britain. We've just seen Turner and the Masters. And I'm holding this empty Coke can. Couldn't find a bin in the Tate Britain to throw it away. Walking to the tube, no bins in sight. No, with anti-terrorism measures, there aren't going to be bins on the tube. So, not wanting to carry this for an entire journey across London, I see all these cans lined up on empty cans lined up on the wall, and so I, just for company, my little Coke can can join the others. They can be recycled, of course, later on. As I do this voice behind me says, "What on earth do you think you're doing?" I look round, and this woman on the phone to someone says, "Yes, you." And so I meekly pick up my can and carry on walking. She's still behind me, still on the phone, and now is talking to whoever she's talking to on the phone about me. "Yeah, you won't believe this. This idiot just decided to put his can down in broad daylight. Yeah, I certainly told him what to do." And anyway, she seems to go on and on all the way as we're walking to the entrance of the tube. Anyway, I'd had enough of this, and what happened next I'm not remotely proud of, but it happened. I turned to her just as we were about to go into the tube, and I said, "You know what? You need to get out more. Watch." And I put the can down on the ground and walked off. I could barely dare to look at my wife, who's normally fiercely loyal, but as I caught her eye, she just did that. Now, I hate littering, and yet I want to excuse myself when I'm caught. More than that, I was angry and proud at what? At being held to my own standards. Now, amongst the junk mail that comes through our letterboxes was this. Let me read it to you. Planet Earth is 4,600 million years old. If we condense this inconceivable time span into an understandable concept, we can liken Earth to a person of 46 years of age. Nothing is known of the first 7 years of this person's life. And whilst only scattered information exists about the middle span, we know that only at the age of 42 did the Earth begin to flower. Dinosaurs and the great reptiles that did not appear until 1 year ago when the planet was 45. Mammals arrived only 8 months ago. In the middle of last week, man-like apes evolved into ape-like men. And at the weekend, the last ice age enveloped the earth. Well, it certainly felt like that here. Modern man has been around for 4 hours. During the last hour, man discovered agriculture. The Industrial Revolution began 1 minute ago. During those 60 seconds of biological time, modern man has made a rubbish tip of paradise. He has multiplied his numbers to plague proportions, caused the extinction of hundreds of species of animals, ransacked the planet for fuels, and now stands like a brutish infant gloating overtly over this meteoric rise to ascendancy. He's on the brink of the final mass extinction and of effectively destroying this oasis of life in the solar system. Now, that is not a religious pamphlet, as you might imagine, but rather, and you might recognise it, it's a statement made by Greenpeace. How do you feel about that? Does that make you sad or angry? And if you were God, would you be angry that the paradise you'd created had been plundered and ransacked? Would you want justice? Or would you just be happy to overlook it? And what about you as an individual and your responsibility for, say, the environment? Would you like to be judged? Would you like justice to be served on you for your own green credentials? I suppose it all depends on who we're being compared with. I mean, how about Jeremy Clarkson? He and his petrol-head mates make us all feel better, don't they, about our modest efforts to be environmentally responsible. Now, love him or loathe him, Jeremy Clarkson makes us all feel very self-righteous, don't you think? We're so forgiving to ourselves when it comes to this. We'll fly abroad, buy some carbon offsets, we say 3 Hail Marys, 2 Greta Thunbergs, and sleep like a baby. You see, we human beings have made quite staggering achievements in this century. But on the other hand, the age-old curses of war and famine, poverty, racism and widespread injustice, they remain, don't they? As they have done for millennia. And the 20th century, the last century, for all its sophistication and self-satisfaction, it went down in history as the most brutal on record. So, question, do we want justice? Well, the answer is yes and no. Jesus says that the real problem is not out there so much in the structures of society, and I'm not denying the need for social structures to be challenged and changed. But Jesus says whatever structures we have, and that I believe is the naivety of critical theory, the real problem is in here. It's in the human heart. The main problem is not external, but internal. The heart of the human problem is the problem of the human heart. Jesus put it like this in Mark's Gospel chapter 7, I read from verse 20. Jesus says, it's what comes out of a person that makes him unclean. For from the inside, from a person's heart, come the evil ideas which lead him to do immoral things, to rob, kill, commit adultery, to be greedy, and to do all sorts of evil things, deceit, indecency, jealousy, slander, pride, and folly. All these evil things come from inside a person and make him unclean. So all the massive problems we see on a large scale outside of us, they stem ultimately from a problem at an individual level. 100 years ago, the Times newspaper asked a number of famous authors to write on the topic, what's wrong with the world? Now, G.K. Chesterton's written piece was the shortest. He simply wrote, Dear Sirs, I am. Yours sincerely, G.K. Chesterton. Now, that is the mark of moral maturity and courage, is it not? Now, you might say, but what about somebody like Mahatma Gandhi? There is a righteous man, if ever there was one, with his fasting and his peaceful resistance and his passion for justice. Surely Gandhi makes a nonsense of the Christian idea of universal human sinfulness. Well, in Gandhi's autobiography, Experiments with Truth, in the preface to that book, he says some very candid things. Let me read to you from it. I hope to acquaint the reader fully with all my faults and errors. In judging myself, I shall try to be as harsh as truth, as harsh as I want others also to be. Measuring myself by that standard, I must exclaim, where is there a wretch so miserable and loathsome as I? I have forsaken my Maker, so faithless have I been. For it is an unbroken torture to me that I am still so far from him, who, as I fully know, governs every breath of my life, and whose offspring I am. I know that it is the evil passions within that keep me so far from him, and yet I cannot get away from them. Now that really makes you think, doesn't it? Here was somebody who was outwardly so good, or certainly seemed it, but who nonetheless was acutely conscious of evil within. Even the atheist philosopher Bertrand Russell said this: it's in our hearts that the evil lies, and it's from our hearts that it must be plucked out. So how do you see yourself? Are you basically good? Well, do you rate yourself as better or worse than Gandhi? If you're better than Gandhi, then you really must be truly exceptional. But if you're no better than Gandhi, and if he has an accurate self-knowledge, then you must be, by his definition, full of evil. Yeah? Well, here's an experiment to help ourselves, and I warn you, it's not particularly comfortable. Do you remember the Charlie Brooker Black Mirror episode, The Entire History of You? Everyone has a memory implant that records everything they do and say and hear. Now just imagine you have such an implant in your brain, but unlike on the Brooker Black Mirror, this one also, as well as your actions and your words, records your thoughts. Everything that flashes across your brain when you tell your girlfriend you love her, what you're really thinking. How would you feel if all the juicy bits of lies, gossip, jealousy, pride, arrogance and lust, all of them were not only recorded by this chip, but then were leaked and made publicly available on YouTube? Now come on, let's be honest, I certainly would be horrified. I think the main reason most of us are not more outwardly bad is that we probably lack the opportunity or lack the imagination, or both. We are living in la-la land if we think we're basically good, that we're okay. Now God in reality does see everything we think, everything we do, everything we say, and how could he possibly overlook all he sees, all he hears? How does that make you feel, that God knows all that? On the one hand, it means our lives are ultimately significant, that they're meaningful, and that justice will be done at the end of time, since nothing goes unseen. That, at one level, is certainly philosophically comfortable, but it also means me and you, and not just them, okay, that we're accountable for how we live, how we think, how we speak on God's planet. I can see the attraction of atheism at this point, can't you? It would be very comforting, wouldn't it, and convenient for there to be no God and no ultimate justice in the universe. It means that for the years you're on this planet, you can do whatever you think you can get away with. Now that may be comforting, it may be a comforting thought, but it's an inadequate one. It just lacks the elegance and the explanatory power to do. Not least because it removes any ultimate basis for right and wrong, for mercy and justice. You see, God isn't indifferent to our attitudes, to our behaviour. Our rejection of him and the appalling consequences human sin has wreaked on his world have provoked his divine anger. Now, unlike us, we can get petty, can't we? God's wrath is righteous, it's free from petulance. But it's all the more terrible because it's so good and pure and impartial and settled. But what actually, anyway, is the alternative to God being angry at our wickedness? What if he were serene about how we behave? How would you and I feel if in a few weeks' time the George Floyd murder trial, it starts, and then a sympathetic jury finds Derek Chauvin neither guilty of second-degree murder nor second-degree manslaughter, even though we've seen a video of this appalling killing? We'd be outraged. Well, similarly, would God be good if he was merely pained by our sin? If God is not filled with wrath and righteous indignation, how can he possibly be a good, holy and just God? Gary Haugen, he was the former director of the United Nations genocide investigation in Rwanda, and he wrote this reflection. Standing with my boots knee-deep in the reeking muck of a Rwandan mass grave, where thousands of innocent people have been horribly slaughtered, I have no words, no meaning, no life, no hope. Unless there is a God of history and time who is absolutely furious, absolutely burning with anger towards those who took it in their own hands to commit such acts. You see, God's business, according to Jesus, is not so much forgiveness, but primarily upholding the moral fabric of this universe. To be good, God must punish wickedness, sin, to use the old-fashioned word. He can't just overlook it. You see, sin is a rejection of God and a rejection of his rule, and it's the cause of all that desperately goes wrong in this world, and not just the destruction of the planet, but all the breakdown in relationship, all the hatred, all the anger. And surely a just and holy God is going to be rightly angry and demand justice. Now, if we have a problem with that, and I can see why sometimes we do, wouldn't we have a bigger moral philosophical problem with a God who just remains serene in the face of evil and rebellion? He wouldn't be good. And I honestly think that one of the reasons people often don't understand the death of Jesus is because they don't understand their own danger. Christians always talk about Jesus dying on the cross, and he was there offering himself to satisfy God's demand for sin, for wickedness, to be punished, to show that there must be justice in the universe. Jesus was dying to save us from God's righteous and settled wrath against our sin and our wickedness. Now, I know a lot of you students are very sharp-minded, and some of you are thinking, hang on, that is not justice. Because you're thinking what's happening is, here is God, okay, and here is us, and God is offended at us, and then this innocent third party Jesus, he gets caught up in all the trouble and has to take the rap for us. No, it's really clear, according to Jesus, according to the entire witness of the Bible, there is no third party. Jesus was not a bystander accidentally caught up in our mess. God the Father and Jesus the Son were so close in this matter, they were essentially one. Jesus deliberately and willingly died for you and for me. There's a verse in the Bible that says, God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son. You see, this was God paying the price himself. Now, it's hard to get our heads around substitution, but maybe think of it this way, to illustrate that God is taking the punishment. Think of God as a wife who's been cheated on. Now, how should, in the real scenario of a wife being cheated on, how should a wife feel about her husband going off and living with another woman? Should she be serene and passive? No, no, no. It'd be far more normal and acceptable for her to be hurt and even to be angry. Now, here's the twist. One day, the husband who's cheated on her turns up at her house and knocks on the door, and he's genuinely repentant. And he says, oh, please forgive me. I want to come back. Will you have me back? I've ended the other relationship because I want to repair things with you. There's no good reason why you should say yes, but if you'll have me back, please do. Now, what should she say? What if she said, oh yeah, sure, I hardly knew you were gone. Let's put the kettle on. Now, that would be amoral, wouldn't it? That would be indifferent. If she was serene and cool, it would suggest there wasn't much of a relationship to salvage anyway. Should she remain angry and take him to the cleaners in a divorce? Justice would be on her side. But she wants more than enmity. She wants more than justice. You see, to remain angry wouldn't be a healing, it would be more like an amputation. Now the thing is, as hurt and angry as she is, she still loves him. And she does want to have him back. So how does that happen? There is another way, but it's incredibly costly. It's the way of love and mercy. It's not easy and it's not sentimental. You see, true love has the power not to ignore hurt, but to absorb it. So rather than allow the relationship to be destroyed by the offence, what if the woman chose to say to her husband, I do still love you, you have hurt me deeply, but I will have you back. Now you might say, well, hang on, that's a bit cheap. Where's the price tag? Well, that man would know, wouldn't he? He would know that the cost of his acceptance, his forgiveness, would be the pain and anguish that his wife absorbed, and a pain that she would feel every day of her life, and she would take to the grave. And you know, that's what Jesus did on the cross for you and for me. He chose the way of love. Yes, of course, he was angry. We'd set up enmity between us and God. We'd made ourselves enemies. And yes, justice would be us getting punished. But there is a place for mercy and justice to meet. Even though our sin has defiled and hurt everything he loves, everything he's made, he wanted a way to be made whereby we could come back. And so there on the cross, it was as if Jesus absorbed the pain and the awfulness of our sin, almost digesting it. This is the one place in history and time, in the history of the universe, where justice and mercy meet, and where enmity between us and God can be removed. You see, God loves us. He always has. He's loved you every day of your life. And through the death of Jesus, the just price for our rebellion has been paid. Now, my prayer as I finish here, and I don't know you, but my prayer for you is that you will have the good sense to humble yourself before this God and ask him for that mercy, that forgiveness and acceptance. You know, he longs to bestow it upon you. And as you do that, as you ask him by virtue of Jesus' death to forgive you, you will begin a wonderful journey with God, in whose image you were made. And you will want to call out for justice in an unjust world. You will call out injustice wherever you see it, but with a new perspective. It won't be the zero-sum game cancel culture where you're just looking for hits. No. There's more than enmity in our quest for justice. There is love. And for those who have been shown love, they in turn will show it. Thanks so much for listening.